Hello, Agilistas, and welcome to another episode of Agile Bytes. I'm Phil Ledgerwood, and this show is put on by Integrity Inspired Solutions, where we build software in an agile manner, day in and day out. And today's topic is going to be perhaps one of our most controversial. There's going to be a number of people who will think differently than I do about this, which is great. I highly encourage you to listen to other points of view on this or any of the topics that we bring up in Agile Bytes. I will say, though, that everyone who really knows a lot about it agrees with me. I did a very scientific study to make that determination, and I discovered that 100% of people who really understand this topic have exactly the same opinion I do. So you don't need to go out there if you don't want to, but I'm just saying, right? You could go out there and see what other people have to say about this. But today's topic is, who is Scrum for? And it's probably not you. Statistically speaking, there's a lot of people who are using Scrum who maybe Scrum is not actually for. And so I wanted to talk to you about that. Because in my experience, here's how a lot of organizations end up doing Scrum. And I want to preface this by saying this is not an anti-Scrum talk. If some of you maybe have even already shut this off. So, oh, here's somebody else bad-mouthing Scrum. This is not about Scrum being bad. This is about, are you using Scrum in the situations where it is the best fit? It's got nothing to do with whether it's bad or not. You know, I don't use hammers to fix my watch, and that doesn't mean hammers are bad. It just means that they are built for other things. So here's how a lot of organizations come into Scrum. They're trying to do software. Software development is hard. It's hard to do with a team. It's hard to do with lots of people. And you run into issues, right? You run into missed deadlines. You run into estimates that were way off. You run into silos where only certain individuals know about an application or a part of the business that's being modeled by the application. Things are taking a lot longer than you might like. Maybe your team has a number of bugs or some other kind of rework that they're having to do. And these things are all par for the course for a lot of software development organizations. And so at some point, somebody, usually a manager of some kind, thinks there's got to be something out there that can help us with this stuff, right? There's got to be a better way to do things than the way we're doing it. I've heard about Agile. I've heard it's pretty good. I heard it'll make us go faster or something like that. So they go out on the internet, they start looking around, and sure enough, what do they find but Scrum? Scrum is by far and away one of the most popular approaches that organizations take who are trying to increase their agility. So much so that many people, erroneously, use Scrum and Agile as synonyms. It's almost like people asking for Kleenex, right, instead of facial tissue. The branding has been so successful that people will say, yeah, we're Agile, or we do Agile, and what they mean by that is they use Scrum. And so they try Scrum, and Scrum starts to work better than what they had before. And I would chalk this up as to the fact that sometimes people who choose to use Scrum, it's a great fit for their situation. But I think in most cases, the reason Scrum ends up working better, at least in the short term, is because of something called the untrained effect. Now, those of you that know me, that have seen me, know that if there's anything I know a lot about, it is weight training. A lot of you probably don't know this, but we have to use a special filter for the cameras here in the office to keep my biceps in the shot. It's amazing, and I can't get on elevators. Like it's a long story. Okay, but the point is, if you look at me, you know I know a lot about weightlifting, right? And there's this thing called the untrained effect, and what it is that if people have never lifted weights in their lives, for those first couple of weeks, it almost doesn't matter what they do, they're gonna gain muscle. Right? It doesn't matter if their program is optimized. It doesn't matter if they are working the muscle groups in the most efficient way possible or the muscle groups that they need to work out the most. None of that matters. Is for those first few weeks, if they're just picking up heavy things at random on a regular basis, they're going to build muscle no matter what they do. But the problem is that the untrained effect only carries you so far. Eventually, you are going to need a program. You are going to need something that's optimized for you. You're going to need something that works the muscles you need to work and really builds on both your strengths and your weaknesses and is a routine that you can do and focuses on the things that you need, maybe have to adjust the diet in there. There's all kinds of stuff really that goes into an effective weight training program that's more than just, well, I'm going to pick up heavy stuff and carry it around. So eventually, those gains you get from the untrained effect are going to vanish. And this happens with a lot of teams doing Scrum that I find. They start, they go like 3-4 weeks, and they're like, oh, this is great. You know, this is so much better than the Wild West chaos we used to have, or waterfall, or whatever it was. But after a while, cracks begin to show, right? It becomes more and more difficult to use Scrum with the work that the team is doing. Now, in fairness, sometimes this is because the organization is not making the adjustments they need to make to increase their agility. If Scrum isn't working for a particular team or a particular organization, it may have nothing to do with Scrum at all. It may be because the team or the organization is very resistant to the kinds of cultural and practical changes that Scrum is requiring of you to do Scrum well. And as you make those changes, you can increase your agility. So sometimes that's the reason. And you should always talk about that. You should always think about that. But sometimes the reason Scrum doesn't work for you is not because you aren't doing it right. It's not because you aren't changing the way you should. It's because it was never a great fit for the kind of work that you're doing to begin with. And you're sort of trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, and it's a struggle. What kinds of situations is Scrum really best at? Where does it really shine? And I'm going to give you an example, okay? Let's say that you and I are going into business together. Lucky you, by the way, but let's say we are, and our product idea is we're going to make an online Kanban board. But of course, there's dozens and dozens of these out there, right? Well, ours is going to be different. Our unique proposition is our Kanban boards are going to be tied directly to flight levels. We are flying Klaus Leopold over here to be our subject matter expert, and he is going to tell us how to make solid boards for the strategic level, the operational level, and then the actual delivery level. So he's over here telling us that information, and we're building boards. And we're thinking, okay, we're building this product. What kind of features should we get out the door first? And so we think, well, let's go flight level 3. Let's make some strategy boards. So we take 2 weeks or a month or whatever our time box is, and we build out the minimum viable product or the minimum increment that we can for a strategy level board, just some bare basic features, and we get it out in front of people. And when we do that, they come back with feedback and they say things like, well, I like it, but what I really need from a strategy level board is something that will allow me to track an initiative against the success criteria we've got for it. You know, a lot of times when you have a strategy, the goal for that strategy is quantifiable in some way, right? Like we need to increase subscribers by 20% in the next 6 months or something like that. So people say, well, I really need that feature in order for the strategy board to be viable. Some people might say, you know what, I like what you've done with the strategy board, but honestly, we use other things for our strategy and it works fine. What I really need is help on the operational level. I really need you guys to crank out some stuff around that. And then we might have some feedback like, this UX is terrible. Like, I can't use this product. So all of a sudden, we're getting new information from our customers or from our prospective customers suggesting new features, changes to current features, and in one case, even a change to the whole UX. So now we have decisions to make, right? What is the next most important thing that we need to build and get out in front of people? We didn't know in advance, right? We didn't have 6 months of development lined out because we're having to explore. We're having to take baby steps with our product, put a little thing out there, put an increment in front of the people who have a stake in this, who can give us good feedback, and see what they say. And then on the basis of what they say, we're going to think about it and reflect, and then we're going to go, okay, well, on the basis of the feedback we've got, the next important move we could make would be to add that results tracking to strategy or put strategy on hold while we build out some features at the operational level or something like that. We're going to make those decisions about what goes into the product and when on the basis of the information that we're getting back. These are the situations where Scrum really shines, where we have to innovate and we have to compete in a complex space, where whatever we build next is something that we're figuring out in response to the feedback we're getting. And if that's what your scenario looks like, you're building out a product, you only really know what the next increment or maybe the increment after that is going to be like. But outside of that, it's the great unknown, right? And you need to take baby steps so that you can get feedback, reflect, figure out what your next increment is going to be, figure out what your next set of features are going to be. You don't know in advance. You need the environment to tell you so you can adapt to it. In those situations, Scrum does well. That's what it's really made for in terms of software development. The further you are from that scenario, the less and less valuable Scrum becomes. Because Scrum is really about exploration and innovation and validation of assumptions. It doesn't have anything to do with efficiency or speed or predictability or increasing your quality or breaking down your silos or any of those other things. Now, those things may happen, right? As a result of trying to do Scrum and increasing your agility, you may experience gains in all of those things, either because you're changing or due to the untrained effect, like we said. But Scrum is not about any of those things. If you decided to use Scrum because you're wanting to increase your efficiency or have more accurate product projections or break down your silos or reduce rework or any of that stuff, that's really more about lean than it is about agility. And that's really more about optimizing your flow than it is about innovating around a brand new product that you're exploring in a complex and adaptive space. So my question to you is, how much does your work look like that? Now, in many organizations, you're probably thinking, well, all of our software development looks like that to some extent. Yeah, all software development does look like that to some extent. There's rarely a software development project where there isn't a level of unknown to it. There's uncertainty involved with every piece of knowledge work, every bit of software development. Nor is there a software project where feedback is unimportant, right? Where we get that feedback and we are responsive to it. That's a big part of increasing our agility, shortening the feedback loops so that we can be more responsive to the things that we hear so that we end up building exactly what the customer needs at the end of the day. But a lot of the reasons people looked for Scrum to begin with really have nothing to do with what Scrum was built to solve. And so you really need to ask yourself, is Scrum really the best thing for our particular work? There's always going to be some level of uncertainty, but how uncertain is it? Are you always in a position where you're having to discover what the next set of features are? We don't know what the next thing is to build. We need to get an increment out there. We need to hear back from the market or our internal users or whoever. And that information is going to tell us what direction to take the product, right? We don't know. We haven't predetermined it. We might have a high level plan of what we want to do, but ultimately we're going to throw that away in light of what the market is actually telling us. We're going to navigate through this dark room in these baby steps. If that's where your product is at, Scrum may be a good fit for what you're trying to do. If that's not where your product is at, if you know what the next 6 to 9 months are probably going to bring in terms of your feature set, if you already have your high-level feature list, if you already have a backlog that has 3 or 4 or more sprints worth of user stories in it, and you're pretty sure you're going to do most of those things, in that situation, Scrum is just not as helpful. It wasn't built for that. It wasn't built for teams who know what they're going to build, basically. It's a process that's built around product innovation and competition. It has very little to do with your software development operations as software development operations. So what should you do if you're in that situation? Maybe some of your projects are very exploratory, but other projects are not, right? Or maybe if you think about your work, you think, well, most of our software is internal use. And yeah, there's some things we don't know about it. There's some things we're going to figure out. We're going to get feedback from users and we're going to change things, but we're not going to pivot this product. We're not going to go down road A and then all of a sudden decide, wow, we need to switch and build a different feature set out. That's just not going to happen, right? We may switch individual things out here and there, but at the end of the day, it's basically going to be this product that we set out to build at the beginning. If that's your situation, or what I sometimes say to Scrum teams is, if you review on Friday and you sprint plan on Monday, like you just have stuff already queued up and ready to go, then Scrum may not be doing you much good overall. Most of the things that people want to get out of being lean or being more agile, you can get without Scrum. You need Scrum, or I should say Scrum is a very valuable thing to pursue in the situations that I just described. Outside of that, you can try all kinds of other things. Read the Agile Manifesto and just come up with stuff, right? Just have a retrospective with your team and think, what's an improvement we could make to increase our efficiency or increase our predictability or to break down our silos or to increase our quality. Don't go looking for some predefined framework to use in a situation where you don't need it. If all you're wanting are some of these other benefits, the reasons that many people turn to something like Scrum, just sit with your team and figure out something to do. That works. You've got the Agile Manifesto. You know what values you're trying to uphold. Just come up with stuff. Just brainstorm experiments and see how they go. If you're wanting to increase your flow efficiency, then there are systems out there specifically for that. Kanban, of course, big fan of that. There's plenty of others. Tameflow is something that I'm a big fan of. If you want to use Kanban and bring theory of constraints into what you're doing to really optimize your operations. And Tameflow also has moves, which are very similar to getting increments out the door and getting feedback from the market. There's all kinds of other things you could be doing, including literally no specific thing. Right? If you're just trying to become more agile or more lean and get those benefits, then by all means, sit with your team and just figure out what are the different practices that you might want to try and then see if they work or not. But if you are in a highly exploratory environment, if you are building a product and you really don't know what's going to come next, you need the market to tell you, then Scrum is one of your options that could be very valuable in that scenario. The further away you get from that, the less valuable it's going to be. And it still may work for you. If it's working for you, then by all means keep it. Whatever's working for you is what you should keep doing. But you might want to take a look at it, because I think what you want to end up with is, if you are going to do Scrum, it should be a conscientious decision, because there are specific things that Scrum gives you that you want, and it brings that value to you, and it's the best way to get that value. And if you've made that decision, then by all means keep it. But if you haven't gone through that process of really evaluating if Scrum is really the best thing, given the nature of the products you're trying to build and the work you're trying to do, don't try to shoehorn that into Scrum. Just come up with the practices that are going to work for you, which may be like Scrum. They may look very different than Scrum. But whatever it is, instead of dropping a canned process on top of what you're doing, think about the work you're trying to get done and pick the things that are really going to fit that. Thanks everyone for listening to Agile Bites. Agile does sometimes bite, but we don't think it always has to. If you enjoyed what you heard today, don't forget to like and subscribe to this podcast on whatever platform you happen to be using. And if you can, leave us a comment, because we'd love to hear your feedback. What things would you like to hear about? What things did you hear that were valuable to you today? You can also head over to integrityinspired.com to sign up to our email list. But that's all for today, folks. We'll see you next time.